evening, everyone. I'm Yoshiko Inoue, Yale College class of 2000, and I'm a member of the YAA Board of Governors. And I'm part of the Careers, Life, and Yale Committee, which seeks to encourage engagement among alumni and students, and alumni in the university. And I co-lead the Life and Personal Growth channel with Monica Advocate, who is also on this call. And earlier this year, we were brainstorming for possible speaker ideas together. And remember that we attended the assembly in New Haven last fall, and we were both so impressed by all the Yale Medal recipients and their significant contributions. But we found Don Roberts' story particularly compelling and a perfect fit for the Life and Personal Growth channel. So we're thrilled that he accepted our invitation and he's joined us tonight to share his story. So his biography was circulated to everyone before the call, so I won't reread it, but he is Yale College class of 1957. And after Yale, he held leadership positions in business and has also given back so much of his time, resources, and leadership skills to Yale and communities beyond. His ability to connect with and rally his classmates led to making visionary projects a reality, such as the New Haven Public Schools and the Yale School of Music partnership, as well as setting fundraising records at his reunions. He also believes fitness is extremely important to physical and mental well-being, and he not only talks the talk, but walks the talk, or rather runs it, as he has completed 31 Boston marathons and I believe 5 New York marathons as well. And he's contributed a track to the Yale campus. So we would love to make this an interactive conversation to get to know him, but we do ask that you hold off on questions until he completes his prepared remarks. So without further ado, Don, please, everyone, please welcome Don Roberts.
Thanks, Yoshiko. I'm going to talk, I believe, for about 20 minutes and then open this up for questions. So I hope some of my comments do spark some questions on your mind. Let me start with my background before Yale. I grew up in a small New Jersey town with an older brother, just two of us. We went to a very good public high school in Ridgewood, New Jersey. He went on to Princeton, where he graduated summa cum laude. I went to Yale, and there were 5 boys in our high school class who went on to Yale. At that point in time, Yale accepted just 1 out of 3 applicants. So we felt sort of exclusive. It pales certainly in comparison with what goes on today. Yale at that point in time had 1,000 students in each class. Of course, our class was all male, and 2/3 of the class entered from prep schools, 1/3 from public high schools. Yale had 10 residential colleges at that point. The residential college system was just 25 years old then, and about 1/3 of the class belonged to fraternities. So you didn't have to belong to a fraternity, but it was a nice, I think the center of social life back then often was the fraternities instead of the college. This will shock you. Room, board, and tuition, the first 2 years I was there was $1,600. And then the last 2 years it went up to $1,800. I majored in a subject, an area called industrial administration, which I don't think even exists in Yale. As far as my career was concerned, 2 weeks after I graduated from Yale, I joined the First National City Bank, which was a predecessor of what today is called Citibank or Citicorp. I was there at the Citibank for 22 years. When I left, I was supervised a wonderful part of corporate America business, all the airlines, the aerospace, all the public utilities, the domestic oil and gas companies, mining companies, electronics, communications, trucking companies, railroads, and what have you. It was really bread and butter commercial banking and intriguing. I left in 1979 after 22 years to join the United States Trust Company, which was a very different organization. It was a small bank, but it was really catered very much to the wealthy individuals. Today, it's part of Bank of America. I thought I had a chance to run the U.S. Trust Company. That didn't work out. And I retired at age 60 in 1995. I had a fairly easy transition to retirement. I was a director of two public companies, Fortune 500 companies, the York International air conditioning refrigeration company that US Capital is air conditioned with York equipment, as is the halls of Parliament, and every single US atomic submarine and every single UK atomic submarine have York cooling equipment. I was also director of a company called Burlington Resources, which at that time was the second largest producer of natural gas in this country, mostly domestic. And it was bought by ConocoPhillips in 2006. Directors of public companies, it's an interesting experience. You really are using your own judgment accumulated from a career, a lifetime of business to look after the affairs of these companies. A lot of responsibility, and but a wonderful experience testing your own experience and insight. I also was deeply involved with several not-for-profit entities. One was the New York Roadrunners Club, which in the early days when I was first involved, there was a legendary man named Fred Lebo, who was a great mark at the Runners Club. At that point, the marathons were in Central Park 4 times around that big loop, and would have admitted a maximum of 500 participants. In 1977, the first 5-borough marathon took place. I thought it was a once in a lifetime. I assumed it was just another facet of the 200th anniversary of the Republic, but indeed, there were only 2,000 participants, and it was a huge success. And a year later, with the same 5-borough format, it went to 6,000. And of course, today it has a little over 50,000 participants in what really is, I think, the greatest weekend in the city each year, the most international. 20,000 of the participants come from all over the world. And it was an interesting time when I was involved, because it was the New York Roadrunners was evolving from kind of a seat of the pants organization to something with really very good management, and the responsibilities of the directors were much more oversight and governance and establishing a serious governance operation. I also was head of the board of a New York City boys' school called St. Bernard's. It's a little over 100 years old. It has 375 boys, kindergarten through 9th grade, including among the graduates of the St. Bernard School is a former president of Yale and a member of the College of Cardinals in Rome. I was also head of the board of the Brick Presbyterian Church, which is an old line, 260-year-old church. It was the second Presbyterian church in New York City, and has a wonderful Sunday day school. One point I would like to be sure that is clear is there is no financial remuneration for serving as a director of these enterprises. And I think indeed that's true of almost all not-for-profit enterprises. So the satisfaction of being involved with these organizations is contributing to the well-being of something you really care about. And that's enormous satisfaction. But they have their shares of problems, and the concerns are often quite similar to what goes on in the for-profit corporation. But with no money involved for being a director, the responsibilities are very similar, but you don't get paid for it. Let me go on and talk a little bit about my work for Yale, which, as Yoshiko mentioned, the reunion gift committees. I was chair or co-chair of our 35th, 40th, 50th, and 65th reunion gift committees. Of course, the big one is the 50th reunion, and our class gave $34 million to Yale, raised for that reunion. The largest single gift was $2.5 million. So to get to 34 million requires a broad canvassing and deep giving by an awful lot of people in the class. What gave me enormous satisfaction at that $34 million is the Harvard class of 1957 at its 50th reunion gave $27 million to Harvard, and the Princeton class of 1957 at its 50th reunion gave $7 million to Princeton. So our $34 million matched almost to the nickel the combined efforts of the Harvard and Princeton 50th reunion classes. Going back to our 40th reunion, a classmate named Malcolm Mitchell came up with the idea at that 40th reunion that the class ought to produce something really worthy to deliver to Yale at our 50th reunion 10 years then in the future. Nothing was specified at that. I happened to be the class secretary from our 40th reunion to our 45th reunion. So it fell into my lap to try to make something happen to live up to the charge that Malcolm had rendered to our class. And it took time to get an idea that, and we had a couple of really very, I thought, weak ideas, but all of a sudden somebody suggested that the class ought to do something to enhance the quality of music education in public schools across the country. And it fits so nicely with Yale. Yale is the only Ivy League college with a graduate school of music. And of course, you all know what a big deal singing is at Yale. And we also had right there in New Haven an accomplice in this effort. So we set off in that direction. We called it Music in Schools, and it has three basic legs to it. The first one, and the one that has gotten most of the attention, is a joint venture between the Yale School of Music and New Haven Public School System, so that about 1/3 of the students, the graduate students in the Yale School of Music, teach weekly in New Haven schools with New Haven school teachers, school music teachers in the classrooms, reaching about 1,000 students. Incidentally, New Haven has 21,000 students in the public school system. Yale only has, I think it's 13,000 students at Yale. And when we came up with that idea and approached Dean Blocker, who then and now will retire next month as Dean of the Yale School of Music, was instantly supportive of this. And Reggie Mayo, who was superintendent of schools for the city of New Haven for 20 years and became a very dear personal friend of mine, was instantly supportive. So we had two important accomplices in this. And today, and just one point I would make is that when Rick Levin became president of Yale, which was I think 1993, about then, he had four things he wanted to accomplish as president of Yale. And the fourth one was, quoting, to lend strength to New Haven, where Yale has something to offer. And we felt this joint venture with the school system and the Yale School was very responsive to that goal of President Levin's. And indeed, I personally have gotten some very warm thanks from New Haven parents who come to the annual and semi-annual concerts given by the New Haven school kids at Sprague Hall. That's the part of the school music in schools project that's gotten the most publicity. There are two other elements to it. The second one being every other year, under the auspices of the Yale School of Music, a symposium is held in New Haven, bringing together 50 public school music teachers from all over the country for 3-day seminars. We even had 2 come from Alaska, all expenses paid by Yale. I'll get to that in a minute. The idea being to exchange best practices, and that is, we've now had 7 of those, and it really, I think, has done a lot for the morale of teachers who come to the Dean. There's a class, the dinner there, and Dean Blocker gives a certificate to each teacher with the pictures taken and that sort of thing. The third leg of the project was to fund a faculty position in the Yale School of Music for an individual who can teach musicians at the School of Music about teaching. All of the students at the graduate school, Yale School of Music, of course, aspire to make their livings on the stage, but they're also fairly practical and know that there will be teaching, doing a lot of one-on-one or in schools. So all that was underwritten by a $5 million endowment established by our class at our 50th reunion, which was 15 or 17 years ago. That endowment with Mr. Swenson's great help is somewhere over 10 million, despite 15 years of activity. So let me change gears and tell you a little bit about my personal life. I've lived in New York City now for 65 years, raised 3 children in the city. I've been widowed twice. I am in good health, physically fit. I've jogged nearly every day for the last 50 years, which does wonders for not only one's physical health, but one's mental health. And I've got serious balance problems, but I still get on a treadmill every day and work up a sweat, which keeps my weight under control. I'm less addictive to a good diet, but I sleep very well. I don't smoke, and I drink alcohol in moderation. I would like to be so bold as to pass on 2 pieces of advice that about your financial behavior. Number one is to stay out of debt. I'm not talking about a traditional mortgage on a house, that sort of thing, but debt can be a wonderful way of building capital, but it's equally divisive when things go bad, and you're now aware that things can go bad in the economy. And I think they'll get a little worse before they get better. Also in 2008, things went pretty bad. If you're in debt at the wrong time, it can be a real killer. I mean, literally, it can be a marriage wrecker. Enormous amount of stress can be created through personal debt. And my advice on that score is to stay away from it. The other piece of financial advice is 175 years old, and it's what Mr. McCarver said to young David Copperfield. Income 20 pounds, outgo 20 pounds in 6, result misery. Income 20 pounds, outgo 19 and 6, result happiness. It's 175 years old, but it's still a terrific thing to have in the back of your mind. Let me make 2 more points. And depending on how old you are, you might begin to think about the concept of legacy. And for my money, the Boy Scouts adage makes the most sense in this score. One of the Boy Scout maxims was to leave the campground in better condition than you found it. And I think that's what legacies are all about. I like to think that some of the things I've done for Yale or for the Brick Church or St. Bernard School will have positive impact for each of those fine organizations long after I'm gone. The last point I would like to make is about Yale reunions. And the older one gets, and that is the more senior, these reunions at 40, 45, 50, and so on, become more fun because I think as time goes on, fewer people in the class are trying to impress their classmates. And at this stage of the game, and our 65th reunion last spring, we're all 87 or 88. Every one of us has been through enormous setbacks, whether it's death of spouses or even this terrible thing of death of a child, disappointments in careers, alcohol, divorces, you have it. But the people who show up in reunions are survivors. And the interesting stories are how people have dealt with these setbacks and still have a positive outlook and are looking forward to tomorrow and the next day. So I think the reunions become more and more fun as time goes on. So with that, Yoshiko, I'll turn it back to you and see if people would like to ask some questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Don, for sharing your story and your inspiring advice. So at this point, I have a couple of questions that I could ask to start the conversation, or if you have any, please don't be shy. I think we have a group that we can manage with just unmuting yourself and asking questions as we go along to keep the conversation fluid. So maybe, great, Cynthia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm unmuted. I would like to tell our speaker that I went to his graduation in 1957, and I was the guest of Bob Ganger, and I sat with his parents during the graduation. And also I drove up to New Haven from Westchester County with Joan Bennett, who was in love with Ray LaMontagne. I don't know if you remember these people. but then Ted Kennedy came in and swept her off her feet, and she married him. But I have big connections to Yale. I married a member of the class of 1960. My daughter was the class of 86, chairman of her 25th reunion. My son was 88. I have a granddaughter who's graduating next month, which will be the centennial of her great-grandfather, 1923 Sheffield, but she doesn't want anybody to know that. You know, just don't say that. So anyway, I appreciate all you've done for Yale, and I have been there so many times. I have so many memories, and I walked her through Phelps Gate in 2018 when she entered, and both of my children were working the reunions at the time. So anyway, I've been a huge affection for Yale. I live in Charlottesville, the home of University of Virginia, and my heritage is here in Virginia. But in any case, thank you for your talk. I loved it.
Well, you're very kind, and it does remind me, one of our most distinguished classmates is named Calvin Trillin.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
he wrote a couple of books that, if you haven't read them, you should, because they're steeped in Yale. One was Messages from My Father. It's about how Bud ended up at Yale rather than going to the University of Missouri, where he grew up. And there are even some pictures in that book of pictures taken by the great life photographer Alfred Eisenstadt
Oh,
of
yeah.
that 1957 graduation. And the other book that you should read if you haven't is called Remembering Denny.
No, I haven't.
Denny Hansen was a remarkable classmate, and Bud wrote a terrific book about Denny. Both books are, I think anybody listening might enjoy any of those books, but I think you would especially.
Thank you. I'll write that down. I write everything down.
Hi, I'm Deborah DeVegin. Mr. Roberts, just absolutely fantastic to hear your comments. Loved your words of wisdom, and your appeal to go to reunions couldn't be more on point. I've run a bunch of our reunions and enjoy doing it. And it's not only about survivors, but people with wonderful stories and people who want to create community. And I think that's the thing that Yoshika has done tonight. And that's fantastic. And thank you all. Mr. It's always hard for me to, I shouldn't say Mr. Roberts, but I guess Don. What gives you joy? You shared so much of your activities, or your personal life and your professional life and all the work that you've done at Yale. But what gives you personally joy?
What do I personally enjoy?
No, what gives you joy?
Oh,
Might be a little different.
I'm very happy with where I am in life, and I probably shouldn't say this. And I had 2 marriages. The second one was a wonderful marriage, and Mary died of Alzheimer's. She was home for 15 years of that until the day before she died. She died 4 years ago, but who would believe it at 87 that in the last 6 months I have a lady friend, and just to prove that going to reunions can be fruitful, I met her. She's the widow of a classmate, and we're having a lot of fun together. And I'm happy to say that her children and my children all think this is good behavior on the part of their parents.
That's fantastic. Well, it's so funny because a couple of months ago, I went to a 40th high school reunion, and now I'm going out with a guy that I had said hello to once in high school. Same story, although you've got a bunch more years on me. I love it.
No, well, I didn't intend to mention that, but I think it fits.
I love that. Monica, I think you have your hand up.
Thank you so much. Donald, this was wonderful to hear what your life at Yale and beyond has been. And I especially am interested in the music program that you established in the New Haven schools. Because actually I spoke to my young friends, Alex Gryaznov from Wilbur Cross School, as well as Dante Castillo Duran from Celentano, and they both are in the music programs. And I was wondering, are you actually sponsoring them?
Well, we're sponsoring students at the Yale School of Music. They get a stipend for teaching in New Haven Public Schools, and our endowment underwrites those stipends. I think we're going to expand it now a little bit too. I think we're going to be able to help finance instruments so that the kids can, have playing instruments. A lot of the students are interested in voice, but we do also have teaching instrumental programs. And we're talking about this just the other day of underwriting the cost of instruments so everybody can have an instrument who's interested in the program. If I digress back to the last question about satisfaction, I've gotten next week in New Haven, which I'll be at, because I consider him a great pal. And also, as I said earlier, the superintendent of schools, Reggie Mayo, had that role for 20 years, and he's a very good friend. And that the satisfaction of meeting people like that, important in the New Haven school system or at Yale, has been wonderfully rewarding for me personally. But no, the teaching in the New Haven school system, I think, has been a wonderful response to Levin's charge that Yale should do things for New Haven where it has something to offer. And that was part of the inspiration that led to this whole facet of working with the public school in New Haven.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Can I ask a question?
That's a familiar face.
Hi. Don, trigger events have played a major part in my life. Was there a trigger event that got you started down the path to philanthropy, especially to the degree that you have done? And is there anything that caused you to go to Yale rather than elsewhere when you decided to be philanthropic and give back?
Well, it's easier, Rod, to deal with the first part of your question. And I had a truly remarkable father-in-law, the father of my second wife. He lived to be 107, and he was the oldest living graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School. And I could see how much enjoyment and satisfaction he got out of his work for Harvard. And and he was a terrific fundraiser for Harvard. And he also gave a lot of money to Harvard. And it was pure, really very obvious that Harvard meant an enormous amount for him. And, there has to be a little bit of competitive juices in this thing. And that's why I took great satisfaction in our 50th reunion out raising Harvard's class of 1957 and 50. I want to say my father-in-law was not amused when I brought that to his attention.
But he
Not
was a
amused,
role
but
model then. He
He
certainly
didn't
was.
like to lose.
Yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
You bet.
There's a question in the chat, Don, about your interest in visual arts. If you could speak a little bit about that aspect of your interest.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Elizabeth, are you still on? Going to provide additional color, or you think she was saying that she's aware of your interest in the visual arts and you didn't touch on it during your talk? So if you could speak a little bit to it, but I'm not sure if that's enough to go on, or maybe we can come back to Elizabeth if she can chime in. Otherwise, there's another question. What is the best advice you can give us as we age?
Best advice? Well, I'll go back to that 107-year-old. I mean, I remember going to his 107th birthday party and thinking to myself, I probably will never get to another 107th birthday party in my life. And I learned a lot from him. And his favorite expression was, keep moving. So I'll let that go, I think. But, physical fitness has been a big deal in my life. And I think it's being fit, it helps you. Plenty of knocks in life, and being fit physically and mentally helps you deal with them. So like the Navy admiral, the guy who's in charge of the SEALs, has sort of made a name for himself with his theory of make your bed. And so that's, but anyway, keep moving.
That's wonderful. Are there any other questions? Deborah?
Yeah.
Question? Yes, great.
Yeah, another question, please. You've had so many years in the financial services industry, and you've seen transitions over the years and cycles and so on. I'm curious, two things. One, what do you think of cryptocurrency? And two, are there any sort of parallels to what crypto is today relative to what crypto would have been in years past, or what would have been some comparable type of occurrence that you might point to?
I really haven't invested much time in trying to understand crypto. I think, in essence, crypto sort of lacks a fundamental base. There was the gold standard, and that had the base of gold. There was the dollar standard, has the basis of the, for better or for worse, the U.S. The financial strength of the United States behind it, and we need not get into a debate on that. So, it was clear some of the terrible SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, that was just a simple blunder on the part of management. They made the classic mistake of they were buying long-term assets on a highly liquid deposit base that disappeared overnight, and so they had fundamental mismatch between the assets and the liability, and they were gone in a week or two. I guess there've been plenty of manias in life. you know, the tulip, I can't give you any kind of a date on when that was, but a couple hundred years ago, the value of tulips just exploded overnight, and people were paying outrageous sums for tulips, and eventually the air goes out of the balloon. And I guess the one thing I'd say is that values go down a lot faster than they go up, so that you could, and that's true of the stock market, and but eventually, reason prevails, and I guess I would say one piece of advice is don't get involved in some sort of financial activity that you don't personally understand, because if you don't understand it, it's probably got some weaknesses, and you will only regret it. At least if you understand it. I think you're halfway there.
That's great advice. Jeff, I think you had a hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Yoshiko, and thank you, Don. It's really insightful conversation tonight. But I wanted to ask you a real simple question back on the Yale side. You've done a lot. You've given back. I know in my case, I finished up. I was School of Management, mid-90s, and then had some career, had family, had certain things. I got more involved in my 40s. So I was on the SOM board. I was on the Alumni Fund board. I'm on the YAA board today. And it really is great giving back. It's kind of a cliche to say, but you get so much more than what you give when you do these kind of things. And I mentor a lot of students and graduate students. I always tell them, just, you've got this Yale blue layer, use it. It never goes away. And it can be real thick for you or helpful and strong. But you sort of have to be involved. So, I kind of look back and wish I'd even started earlier, just getting a little bit more involved in some capacities with the school. So I'm just interested when you got started and how involved you got after you got started over all these years.
I guess I really didn't do much for Yale until after our 25th reunion. And the boys' school that I mentioned, that's where I sort of got started with fundraising. And it's hard, I think, for anybody to believe that you can really have a lot of fun and, of course, plenty of satisfaction in fundraising. There's a certain cat and mouse element to it. And there can be triumphs, so I sort of cut my teeth for that boys' school, and so a classmate asked me to accept the co-chair of our 35th reunion gift committee, and I said yes. That was really my first significant commitment to Yale, and one thing led to another after that. It does, the fundraising brings you closer to your classmates, and I would always organize a committee of 50 classmates to do those reunion gifts committees. And the attraction to them was I would promise them that they would never have to solicit more than 5 people. And, when you ask them for a year and a half before the reunion, they'll say yes. And of course, doing it and fundraising is by far best done in person. And so I think the old days, people would want to solicit people they knew, but turned out, I think it was much more effective if you solicited somebody who was in Minneapolis and you could do it over lunch or something like that. And so you get, I feel many of my Yale pals come from guys who were on the committee or people I've solicited. And I would say one thing, in all the solicitation I've done for Yale, I've only had 2 classmates sort of work me over. And my response to them was, I don't do this for a living. But the rest of them have been very cordial, and you don't always ask for the right amount, but most of them understand that you are a volunteer, and they seem to appreciate sort of one-on-one contact.
Don, I think when we were preparing for a call, you had mentioned, that some of the classmates you had reached out to who, didn't necessarily, buy into giving for Yale, they changed their minds when you spoke to them about the School of Music and in teaching in the public schools initiative. So can you share a little bit about that?
Sure, I can think of one classmate in particular, I obviously won't use his name, who had been a partner of a successful law firm in New York. And his financial support for Yale was pretty modest under the circumstances. And he said that his wife felt very strongly that Yale, in effect, had all the money it needed. But finally, that the fact that the endowment that the class created for that music in schools program, and particularly the support that it gave to School of Music students who were teaching public schools, the tie between Yale and the New Haven public school system, as evidenced by that, meant a lot to his spouse, and Yale was doing something useful beyond its own 4 walls. And in fact, doing what Levin had laid out as an important goal for his presidency. And that particular program has won several awards. There's even some awards based on the fact that it was developing a tie between Yale and New Haven. And it was interesting, that one particular couple, it was that program working with the schools in New Haven that turned them around as givers to Yale.
Love that story. Thank you. And then on a related note, Stephanie asks, what is the secret to fundraising? What tips can you offer for us?
Well, it takes time. By far, best done in person, one-on-one. And the key is to find the thread like that turns somebody on. And I'll tell one war story about that. A very enterprising guy in our class was terrific at fundraising, and he'd been on the Daily News, and there was another guy that he was soliciting who was also on the Daily News, which is a really an intimate tie. And the person being solicited was not returning Tom's phone calls or contacts. And Tom knew that this fellow was very interested in horse racing. Tom was from Baltimore. So Tom sent him a fax, I think, 20 years ago, saying that he was going to bet $20 on such and such a horse in the Preakness, Preakness is the big race, the Triple Crown race in Baltimore. And within minutes, the guy was on the phone saying, for God's sake, not such and such, bet on this horse. And that led, this fellow, this was actually the 53 Union, moved his IRA beneficiary to Yale and so on and so forth. It was finding that tiny little thread of interest that could get somebody to attend. And of course, the key is to find an interest, a Yale interest that it would turn on a classmate. But it's best done in person. It's also best done to have an amount of money involved when you're with somebody. And my favorite word is consider. You know, would you consider a $10,000 gift or $25,000 gift or whatever the number is? Hopefully you got a number that's in the ballpark. But you've got to get a number out on the table. And that's best done when you can see them face to face.
That's really helpful advice. Thank you. And then I have a couple questions here, but given the time, maybe you can speed through them. Given that many people don't have role models to show them the importance and pleasures of philanthropy, is it something we should be introducing for our young people, perhaps even in high school?
Gee, I don't know the answer to that. Clearly the Boy Scouts are dealing with 10 and 12 and 14-year-olds, and I like that concept of you're told to leave the campground in better condition than you found it. But I guess it takes. You've got to be a little older to the point where you can be gratified by things that delay immediate gratification, and you can look to the long-term benefits of I gave the indoor track, named it for Frank Shorter, who had won. There's something called the Sullivan Award, which goes annually to the outstanding male and female amateur athlete. Frank won it in 1972, I guess, when he won the Olympic marathon in Munich. And he had done a favor for me, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later. And Yale did not have a banked track in Cascades, had a flat track, and Harvard had a banked track. And of course, I couldn't stand the idea that Harvard had a better arrangement than Yale. So I underwrote the bank track, but I put it in Frank's name because I thought Yale ought to honor a athletic hero of his stature. But I find it very satisfying to be able to do something like that. And there's some things at the Brick Church that I go in the sanctuary, and the senior pastor asked me one time if I got any enjoyment out of this thing, and I said, well, I get every time I go in this sanctuary, I get satisfaction unbecoming to a Presbyterian. So, but I think it takes time to derive satisfaction from something other than immediate satisfaction. So I think it might be a hard sell with young people.
Maybe introducing them to the concept of leaving the place right better than you found it. And then just, I guess, introducing to the concept may be a great start. I think Bradford has a question. So, and you.
No, thank you for that. And I think there might have been one question before me in the chat.
So we're coming close to the time, so why don't you go ahead? And then if we have time, we'll squeeze it in.
Okay, no, thank you. Appreciate that. And it may actually dovetail, Don, off what you were just saying. And Don, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the Music in Schools initiative, and congratulations as well on your Yale medal. I'm with the class of 2008. We're about to celebrate our 15th reunion as it happens just next month. And, you know, something that you were mentioning earlier on about it's not too early to think about the legacy that you'll set. It's not too early to think about the legacy that you will leave for, you know, the Yales of the world. If you were to imagine yourself about to head into your 15th reunion year, and if you were to imagine yourself with that at today's Yale, where, you know, a lot of today's young alumni think about, well, you know, so many worthy causes out there, so many things that might be even more in need of, you know, our resources, our time, our treasure. You know, how would you think about that? What kinds of things would you talk about to your classmates in that environment? And, you know, how would you think about sort of not just celebrating a 15th, but that longer legacy that one might think about in terms of Yale?
Well, I have to, an honest answer is that I used to go to reunions with purely the goal of having a good time, seeing old friends and then making some new friends. And I certainly didn't go to reunion for any true worthy purpose. But there I was at that 40th reunion, and Malcolm comes up with this lofty charge, and then it gets dumped in my lap. And you know, the fear of failure is a powerful motivator, but failing in front of 1,000 classmates ups the ante enormously. So I had to make something happen. And we did. It took 2 years to come up with that idea about music in schools, and we wandered down some sort of unrewarding paths. But finally, when and nobody ever in the class, no classmate has ever taken credit for that idea. But when it came forward, it was an instant accept. Anyway, I hate to pour cold water on it, but I never had any worthy goals. I mean, I guess I'd go to a class or two during reunions, but it was mainly just to have a good time. And but all of a sudden, there I was with this thing in my lap, and I wasn't going to let it die there.
Well, thank you. I think you know, we're coming up at the hour, so I'd like to close out the call. But Dawn, thank you again for taking your time, you know, this evening to share your story with all of us. It was so inspiring to hear your advice, and you know, and thank you all for joining us tonight and making this call very interactive. I thought all the questions were really insightful, and you know, we got a lot out of this call. So please, you know, sign on to Cross Campus. That is our platform where we engage with fellow alumni and current students. And please sign on to future Zooms when where we have further programming. So thank you again for joining us this evening, and have a good night.
Thanks for your help, Yoshiko. It's been a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Good night.
Good night.